My nephew rang me at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. I was already in bed, reading the same page of the same novel I'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks. When my phone lit up and I saw Callum's name, I felt something shift in my chest, not panic, not quite. More like the feeling you get when a storm rolls in off the Tasman and the air goes very still just before it hits. Callum doesn't ring late. He never has. Even when his mother, my sister Robin, passed 4 years ago, he texted first and called the next morning. He's methodical, precise. It comes with the job. He works for the New Zealand Police Financial Intelligence Unit, has done for 11 years. And that kind of work teaches you to measure everything before you say it. So when I picked up and his voice came through, clipped and low, I sat up straight. "Uncle Gerald," he said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't turn any lights on. Don't open any curtains. Is anyone else in the house with you right now?" I looked at the lamp on my bedside table. I'd almost reached for it out of habit. "No," I said. "I'm alone." "Callum, good. I need you to go to your storage room, the one off the laundry. Go now, quietly, and lock the door from the inside. Don't ring anyone. Don't answer the door for any reason. I'll explain everything. But I need you to move first. I'm 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a secondary school woodwork teacher in Palmerston North, and the most dramatic moment in my professional life was the time a Year 9 student accidentally put a chisel through the workbench and nicked his thumb. I am not a man built for crisis, but there was something in Callum's voice, a tightness that I had never heard from him before that made me get out of bed without asking another question. I padded down the hallway in my socks, past the framed photos on the wall, past the coat rack where Margaret's old raincoat still hangs, because I haven't been able to move it, through the kitchen and into the laundry. The storage room is small, just big enough for the hot water cylinder, some shelves of old paint tins and boxes, and a fold-up camp chair I'd shoved in there after Christmas. I locked the door, lowered myself onto the camp chair in the dark, and put the phone back to my ear. "I'm in," I whispered. I heard Callum exhale. "Okay," he said. "I'm going to tell you some things that are going to be very hard to hear. Margaret died on a Wednesday morning in March, 2 years ago. We'd been married 41 years. She went in her sleep, which the doctor said was a mercy, and I suppose it was. It didn't feel like one at the time. It felt like someone had walked into a room I'd lived in my whole life and switched the lights off. For the first 6 months, I barely functioned. I kept buying 2 of everything at the supermarket. I'd make a pot of tea and set out 2 cups before I remembered. I lost 18 kilograms without trying because I kept forgetting to eat anything that wasn't toast. My daughter Vanessa was the one who stepped in. She rang every day. She drove up from Wellington most weekends. She reorganized my kitchen, sorted Margaret's medication boxes out of the bathroom, and sat with me on the back porch while I talked about nothing for hours. I don't think I appreciated then what a gift that was. I thought I was being looked after. I thought everything she was doing came from love. Her husband, Derek Stanhope, started coming along about 4 months after Margaret died. He'd always been polite enough, a bit smooth for my taste. The kind of man who wears a collared shirt to a barbecue and laughs too loudly at his own stories, but I'd never had any real reason to dislike him. He worked in property. He knew a lot about interest rates and depreciation, and he liked to talk about it. It was Derek who first brought up my finances. We were sitting at the kitchen table one Sunday, Vanessa making coffee, and he leaned back in his chair and said, very casually, that he'd been thinking about my situation. The house, the superannuation, the term deposits Margaret and I had built up over 40 years of careful living. He said it in that way some people have of making concern sound like strategy. "You're carrying a lot on your own, Gerald," he said. "Vanessa and I have been talking. We'd like to help. Take some of the burden off." I told him I was managing fine. He nodded slowly. like a man who's heard something polite, but doesn't believe it. Over the following months, the idea kept resurfacing in different forms. Maybe I should think about getting my affairs in order. Maybe a power of attorney would give me peace of mind. Maybe it would be simpler if someone else had oversight of the term deposits, just in case something happened. He always framed it as protection. He always made it sound like something I should want. And I was tired. That's the thing I'm most ashamed of now. Grief does something to your judgment that is very hard to explain unless you've been in it. It doesn't make you stupid. It makes you exhausted. And exhausted people take the path that requires the least resistance. When the people you trust are all telling you something is fine, you start to believe them. By the time Vanessa suggested she move in just for a few months, just while you're getting back on your feet, I said yes, before she'd finished the sentence. They came on a Friday with a hire van and 4 cardboard boxes, and within a week Derek had set up a second monitor in my study and was spending 3 hours there every evening after dinner. He said he was working. I had no reason to doubt him. The first thing I noticed was the tablets. Margaret had managed most of our household logistics, including my blood pressure medication. After she died, I'd been refilling the prescription myself every month without thinking much about it. When Vanessa moved in, she started picking it up for me, and she reorganized the bathroom cabinet so my tablets were in a small plastic organizer with the days of the week printed on the lids. She said it was easier than fumbling with the original packaging. I thanked her. Looking back now, I try to remember exactly when I started feeling different. Not ill, precisely. More like the edges of things had gone slightly soft. I'd lose track of conversations. I'd walk into a room and stand there, unable to remember what I'd come for. I put it down to grief. I put it down to age. My GP asked at one appointment whether I was sleeping well, and I said I supposed I was. It was around this time that Derek began raising, with increasing frequency, the subject of the house. The property market was doing something, apparently. There was an opportunity, a lifestyle block out past Fielding that he'd had his eye on. Did I know what lifestyle blocks were fetching these days? He could manage the whole transaction. It would be simple, he said. We'd all benefit. I'd have capital, they'd have space, and I wouldn't be rattling around alone in a 4-bedroom house in town. I told him I wasn't interested in selling. He'd nod and smile, and the subject would disappear for a week before circling back. Slightly reframed, slightly more urgent. I want to be clear about something, because I think it's important. Derek Stanhope is not a stupid man. He was careful. He never pushed hard enough to cause a scene. He always had a reason, always had a document, always had a figure. And he had Vanessa, who would touch my hand after these conversations and say she just wanted me to be safe, to be taken care of. She said it with tears in her eyes sometimes, and I believed her, or I told myself I believed her. There was a part of me, very small, very quiet, that sometimes wondered things in the middle of the night. But by morning, the edges of everything were soft again, and I couldn't quite hold on to what had bothered me. Callum had been watching from a distance for nearly 8 months before he rang me that night. He told me this in the storage room, his voice just above a murmur, while I sat in the dark on the camp chair, with my heart going hard in my chest. His unit had picked up a transaction flag 6 months earlier, a transfer from a term deposit account in my name into a property management company registered to Derek Stanhope, $22,000. Marked in the records as a personal loan. I had not authorized any such loan. Callum hadn't come to me because he needed to know whether the rest of a pattern was there before he could protect the case. He'd been gathering documentation, bank records, a notary signature on a property appraisal that the signing notary later confirmed she had not witnessed in person, a power of attorney document lodged with a solicitor in Wellington that bore what appeared to be my signature. I had not signed any power of attorney. How long? I asked. I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The transfers we've traced go back 14 months, Callum said. At least 6 transactions. The total is somewhere around $140,000. That's what we can confirm at this stage. I sat with that number for a long moment. $140,000. 40 years of teaching. Margaret's nursing shifts. Every year we didn't take the overseas holiday. Every Christmas we kept modest. Every leaking spouting we patched instead of replaced. The reason I need you in that room tonight, Callum said, is that Derek filed a document yesterday requesting a formal guardianship assessment. He's claiming cognitive decline. He's trying to establish incompetence before we can freeze the accounts. I understood then. If a court decided I was not of sound mind, every transaction Derek had made on my behalf would become harder to unwind. The power of attorney would look legitimate. The property transfers would look authorized. The whole architecture of what he'd built would have a legal foundation. There are 2 detectives on their way to you now, Callum said. I need you to stay put until they arrive and verify their identification through the door before you open it. Don't engage with Vanessa or Derek tonight. Don't let on that you know anything. Callum, I said. The tablets. There was a pause. We think so, he said quietly. The blood work will confirm it. I heard them come home just after midnight. I don't know where they'd been. A dinner, perhaps. I heard Derek's laugh in the hallway. That too loud bark I'd always found grating. And then Vanessa's voice saying something about the dishwasher. Normal sounds. The sounds of people who believed they were safe. I sat very still in the dark and breathed slowly. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the particular way she used to make a cup of tea when she knew I needed something but didn't know how to ask for it, just appearing beside me with it. Not saying anything, just sitting down. I thought about how she had loved Vanessa. How proud she had been when Vanessa finished her business degree, when she got the job in Wellington, when she came home for Christmas each year with wine and wrapped presents and her mother's same laugh. Margaret had never doubted her for a moment. I wondered what Margaret would make of this. And then I decided I was glad she didn't know. The knock at the front door came at 12:47. 2 short, 1 long, the pattern Callum had told me to wait for. I unlocked the storage room and walked through the dark laundry, the dark kitchen, and opened the front door with the chain on first. 2 people stood on the porch. A woman with short silver hair who showed me her identification up close to the gap. Detective Sergeant Aroha Ngata, Police Financial Intelligence, and a younger man behind her who nodded when I looked at him. I unhooked the chain. What followed was not dramatic in the way I would have imagined, if I'd ever thought to imagine it. There were no raised voices. Derek came out of the bedroom looking disheveled and confused, and when Detective Ngata introduced herself and explained that she had a warrant, the color went out of his face in a way that was almost cinematic. He looked, for just a moment, like a man seeing the floor fall away beneath him. Vanessa stood in the hallway in her dressing gown. She looked at Derek. She looked at the detectives. And then, she looked at me. I don't know what she was expecting to see in my face. Confusion. Maybe. Bewilderment. The addled expression of a man who wasn't quite sure what was happening. What she saw instead was that I knew. She started to cry. And I want to be honest about this. Some part of me wanted to comfort her. Some deeply ingrained fatherly reflex reached for her. 40 years of being her dad, of kissing her skinned knees and helping with assignments and sitting in cold gymnasiums watching school productions, all of that was still there. It doesn't just switch off, but I kept my hands at my sides, because the woman crying in my hallway had watched her mother die, had come to my home, and had helped someone drain $140,000 from the life her mother and I had built. She had handed me altered tablets with her own hands. She had called it love. The detectives were thorough and quiet. They took Derek's laptop from the study. They took documents from a folder I had never seen before, stored in the bottom drawer of my own filing cabinet. They took Derek himself just before 2 in the morning. He said nothing as they walked him to the car. He didn't look back. Vanessa was not arrested that night. She was interviewed at length. Her cooperation, when it came, was what Callum later described as significant. It turned out my blood pressure medication had been partially replaced. What I'd been taking each morning from the little plastic organizer was a reduced dose of my original prescription, combined with a low-level sedative available without a script in some countries. Not enough to incapacitate, enough to keep the edges soft, enough to make a 67-year-old man doubt his own memory. I had 4 blood tests over the following weeks. My GP, once she understood what had happened, was quiet for a long moment before she spoke. She said she had attributed the cognitive softness I'd described to grief and aging. She said that was the right conclusion given what she'd known at the time. She said she was sorry. I told her there was nothing to apologize for. That was the point, I said. It was designed to look like something ordinary. The investigation took 11 months. Derek Stanhope was charged with obtaining by deception, forgery of a legal document, and willful administration of a stupefying substance. The prosecution established that he had been systematically transferring funds from my account since 8 months after Margaret died. The earliest transfer, $6,000, to a trust account controlled by a property holding company registered in his mother's name in Tauranga, had occurred 14 weeks after Vanessa. And he first began visiting regularly. He had, the prosecutor said, identified me as a target before Vanessa had even asked to move in. Vanessa pleaded guilty to 2 counts of aiding and abetting financial fraud. She gave evidence against Derek, which the judge acknowledged. She also gave evidence about the medication. She said Derek had told her it was a mild supplement. She said she hadn't known. The jury decided otherwise on that specific point, and I think in my honest moments, I agree with them. At sentencing, Derek Stanhope received 7 years and 2 months. The judge noted the premeditation, the abuse of familial trust, and the deliberate targeting of a widower in a period of grief as significant aggravating factors. He also noted that the sum recovered $112,000 of the total, with the remainder tied up in the property company's assets, had been ordered returned in full. Vanessa received 2 years and 8 months, to be served with a non-parole period of 14 months. She looked at me once across the courtroom before they took her out. I don't know what I looked like to her. I tried to keep my face still. Callum drove up from Wellington the weekend after sentencing. We sat on the back porch with cups of tea, which is what we do in this family when there is something large to sit with. I asked him when he'd first suspected. He said he'd noticed things on his visits over the previous year, the way Derek would redirect conversations when Callum asked me direct questions, the way Vanessa would answer for me before I'd finished a thought, the slight flatness in my voice that he'd put down to grief at first, and then, after a while, to something else. He said he'd raised it internally at work as a personal concern long before any transaction flagged on a system. He'd been told to document and wait for evidence. I hated that. I told him I understood. You could have rung me earlier, I said. Even just. I know, he said. He looked out at the garden. I'm sorry, Uncle Gerald. I needed it to be something I could prove, not just something I feared. I've thought about that a lot since. The difference between fearing something and being able to prove it. How much space there can be between those two things, and how much can happen in that space. I'm still in the house. I had a locksmith change every lock the morning after the detectives left, and I spent a weekend going through every drawer and shelf and cabinet to understand what was there and what was mine. It was one of the stranger weekends of my life. Margaret's raincoat is still on the coat rack. I've decided it can stay. I went back to my original pharmacist, a man named Peta who I've known for 15 years. And I asked him to fill my prescriptions personally from here on and to ring me directly if anything changed. He said, of course. He also said, without me asking, that I should come by any time I had questions. I think he understood more than I'd told him. I see a counselor now, a woman in town who works with people navigating elder financial abuse. She told me in our first session that what happened to me is far more common than most people know, that the perpetrators are almost always family or close family friends, that the period following the loss of a spouse is statistically the highest risk window, that the combination of grief, isolation, and a trusted person's sustained persuasion is more effective than most people want to believe. She said it plainly and without flinching, and I was grateful for that. I want to be equally plain now, because if you're watching this, you might be at a stage of life where these things feel distant or unlikely. I would have said the same thing 3 years ago. Never sign a power of attorney under pressure. Not because someone sat you down and told you to sign. Not because the paperwork is already prepared. Not because the people asking love you and mean well. A power of attorney is one of the most significant legal documents you can execute. It should be drafted by a solicitor of your own choosing, one with no connection to the people who will benefit from it, and signed in your own time with no one else in the room. If someone in your life is gradually taking over your finances, your medications, your appointments, even if they're doing it with warmth and good intentions, ask yourself whether you would be able to take those things back easily if you needed to. If the answer is no, or even not sure, speak to someone outside that circle. Grief makes us vulnerable. That is not a weakness. It is one of the most human things about us. But there are people who understand that vulnerability and know how to use it. And they are patient. And they are often people we already love. The Monday after Derek was sentenced, I rang my solicitor and drew up a proper, enduring power of attorney, one naming Callum as my attorney, properly witnessed, filed with my own legal representative. I also opened a separate bank account that I told no one about, into which I move a portion of my funds each month. Not because I distrust everyone, but because I now understand that clarity and caution are not the same as suspicion. They are simply wisdom. I got a card from Callum's daughter at Christmas. She's 9. She'd drawn a picture of the two of us, me tall and thin, him shorter than me in the picture, even though he's taller in real life. Both of us holding cups of what I think were meant to be tea. Underneath, she'd written, in the large looping letters of a child still mastering handwriting, "Your nephew loves you very much." I put it on the fridge. I don't know what the next chapter looks like. I know the house needs some work on the spouting, same as it always has. I know I'd like to finish that novel. I know Callum is coming up next month and I've promised to take him out to Rangitikei for a proper day's fishing like we used to do when he was young. And I know that whatever comes next, I'll see it clearly. The edges are sharp again.